What sea creatures say hello 16 times? 2 octopuses shaking hands. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Northern Canada would get so cold in the winter that it was almost impossible for cars to function. So, my family became very skilled hunters. We would have a hearty meal of deer or rabbit every night, and we learned to grow vegetables indoors for a little bit of freshness in our Viking-like diet. I was around 15 when I first started to hunt alone, and I was 18 when this happened. It was early in the morning and I was tracking rabbits. I had found a nice spot near a rabbit den and bundled up, gun raised, ready to shoot. Something felt off though. It took a minute before I realized the forest was dead quiet. No chickadees, no coyotes howling, no wind. Nothing. It was as if all the creatures in the wild disappeared. As weird as it was, I paid no mind to it and chalked it up to being too cold for animals to be out and about, though that didn't explain the lack of wind and no leaves rustling. I lay in the snow for another 16 minutes before giving up and deciding to set off a different location. Just as I slung my gun over my shoulder, I glanced to the side and froze. A large black dog stood around 10 feet away from me. The dog had on a collar, so I assume it was tamed. But the nearest house was an hour away and it made no sense that a dog would be out here. "Are you lost, boy?" I asked casually, not at the time taking into account how wrong it was for a dog to be all the way out here. "Is your owner here?" The dog just stared. Its eyes were milky and I felt as if they were boring into my skull. I approached the dog and held my hand out for it to sniff it. The dog didn't move, it didn't flinch and its tail didn't wag. I drew my hand back and rummaged through my coat pocket. I pulled out a piece of deer jerky my father had steamed during the week. I snapped it in half and offered the piece to the dog. It took the piece in its teeth before swallowing it whole. I laughed nervously as the dog licked its chaps. "Hungry, huh? What are you doing out here?" I knelt down and stroked the dog's head. Its coat was freezing like the dog had frostbite or fell in a river, but somehow wasn't wet. Its milky white eyes stared into me still. At the time I assumed it was cataracts. A bark came from the left of me, and both I and the dog turned to look. An entire pack of dogs stood in the clearing, all with milky white eyes and black fur. Chills ran down my spine, but still, being a stupid teenager, I just thought it was just a trait of that breed. The dog looked back at me and licked my hand with a tongue that felt like ice before running over to the group. I watched as the pack moved on. The largest dog's eyes lingered on me, before following the others. I watched as they ran off out of the clearing. It was like a reset mode as soon as they left because the forest came back to life. I could hear chickadees, the rustle of wind through leaves and the scattering of nearby rabbits and shrews. I shot 3 rabbits and headed home, still curious about the dogs. A week later I asked why Dad about it, but he said that the neighbor's dog, Sombra, had been missing for months and everyone else either didn't have a dog that matched my description or just didn't have a dog in general. I thought that was very unnerving and didn't hunt for a while after that. The next time I saw the dog it was early spring. I didn't have school to attend until the fall, so I just helped out at home and read and raised chickens. On Monday, both my parents were in Calgary visiting friends, and my brother was sick downstairs watching Game of Thrones, so I was pretty much alone. I sat in the library, reading and sipping some sweet Earl Grey tea. The rain was in a full-out downpour, so the chores I could carry out were mainly indoors and quick to complete. Scratching came at the door, causing the hair on my neck to stand up. We didn't own any animals that could scratch. Scared and curious, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and opened the door. The black dog stood there, its familiar milky eyes staring into my soul. I jumped in surprise at first, but quickly smiled at the thought that the dog came all the way from the woods to my house. "Hey bud," I said, bending down and petting its frosty skin. "How did you find me?" "It was the lavender, wasn't it?" I joked, referring to the essential oil I always had on my hunting gloves and wrists. I could have been mistaken, but I swore the dog nodded its head slightly. "Where are your friends?" I asked. "My brother loves dogs. We could all play a game of ultimate frisbee." The dog blinked up at me in an almost amused manner. It nudged my arm with its cold nose. "Do you want jerky, bud?" I asked. The dog blinked. "All right then. Wait here." I walked to the pantry and grabbed a bag of jerky before returning to the dog. I once again snapped a piece of jerky in half and gave the half to the dog. It swallowed it whole like it did the first time and just sort of wandered back into the tree line. I laughed to myself and the rest of the day went by normally. I awoke that night with fear in my chest. It felt as if I was being watched. Slowly, I sat up and peeked through the curtains. My breath hitched. A woman stared back at me. She stood in the tree line completely naked. She looked Native American but with milky white skin that almost glowed in the moonlight. Her black hair was in 2 long braids. I felt my world crash around me as I stared into her big, white milky eyes. Just like the dog's, I realized. The woman caught my gaze through the window and smiled. It sent chills into my heart. She walked to the window, almost as if approaching an old friend, and tapped onto the glass. I don't know why I did, but I opened the window out of pure curiosity. "Hey, are you okay, lady?" I asked, trying not to sound fearful. She just nodded and said something in a language that I couldn't pin down. I caught nighttime and forest, so it may have been Cree, but it sounded so ancient. "Do you want me to call the police?" She cocked her head to the side. I take it she couldn't understand the question. She took me by surprise when she took hold of my wrist and put a feather into my hand. Her hands were so cold that I shivered. Then she just turned and ran back into the woods. I awoke the next morning convinced that it was a dream, but I turned to find the feather on my dresser. I haven't seen the dog for a year now and I have no idea why the woman came to my window. I still have the feather and I still wear lavender oil. I don't know why the woman and the dog had the same eyes, but after doing some research, I learned about skinwalkers and I feel that that is what I encountered. But they weren't malevolent in any way, and I never felt threatened, only a bit uneasy and cold. And I don't know if this is related in any way, but I often find little presents on my windowsills like rabbit skin, and my parents are curious why dead owls keep appearing on the porch. Hello, my dear friends. It is not a simple ball, it is a magic ball. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. If you have ever heard of skinwalkers, you know some of the terrifying stories that come with the name. You also know that there is one rule you should follow: you shouldn't talk about them or it could attract them. Unfortunately, I didn't listen to that rule. Being that I moved from southern Utah to East Tennessee, I thought I was safe since they originate from the Navajo tribes located in Utah. I could be wrong, but that is what I believed. If you don't know much history about skinwalkers, I highly recommend researching them on your own due to the fact I don't know how much longer I will survive. I live in a pretty rural part of East Tennessee. There are maybe 200 people in a 30-mile radius of me, which means there aren't many indigenous people around either. Where I live is mildly wooded on the property, and the properties next to me are the same, but towards the back, where the property line ends, it's very densely wooded. I don't know if the property owners before me weeded it out that way, but it seems that way. I live alone with an American Bulldog mix named Maxine, Max for short. What makes everything even better is, I live in a fifth wheel, so you can guess it's small. The slightest twin makes the whole camper rock like a boat. The slightest movement makes the camper rock too. My camper has modifications to it, like a deadbolt implemented into the door. It is kinda set up like a studio apartment, just mini. I have a couch, and a full-size bed, and a kitchen. It's all small but very cozy, just enough room for me and Max to live together comfortably. My camper is insulated well, so you can't hear anything except loud sounds around you. On the given chance a car passes the property I'm on, you won't hear it. But when the rooster crows in the property just next to me, I can hear it. The crow will just be muffled. Another thing to mention is, I work from my camper and don't go to many places except my parents or friends if I'm up to driving an hour to see them. Max is my protector. She is friendly until I give her a hand signal. Then she will start to snarl and sit in between my legs. I haven't really seen her act protective or even heard her snarl at anything without my signal until now. Even when a wild fox or skunk comes meandering across my property, she hasn't acted protective. The only way I can explain it is she will escort them off the property. She will stay her distance, but she does in a way escort them off. It's cute in a way. She isn't mean to them, doesn't bark at the wild little creatures, won't lunge or chase them. It's almost like she is protecting them. After 3 years of living here, Max won't venture into the densely wooded area of the forest. She doesn't act scared, but she won't go past the property line unless she is on a leash or in the car. After 3 years of living here, you get accustomed to the wildlife and the sounds they make at night. I would say I'm pretty confident with how well I know the area. Well, that was until now. Around a month ago, in August, I was throwing a bonfire for a friend who was going to leave for work-related things. And I don't exactly know how we got into the topic, but we started to talk about spooky, scary things. A friend of mine asked me if I had any spooky folklore to tell, since my friends knew that I lived in southern Utah and was most likely wanting me to go into mythical creatures and what I knew, and if I had any stories. I myself have a very open mind about literally everything. I believe in ghosts and witchcraft, but most of all, if an indigenous person tells me shit, I'm gonna believe them, whether or not it's true. Well, I gave in, thinking I was safe, and started to tell them about Skinwalkers and then Skinwalker Ranch and how freaky it was that you can't access it anymore because the military won't let you go near it for some reason or another. I mostly touched on spooky things about Skinwalkers, how they are shapeshifters, and how one stalked my grandmother. I went into the nitty-gritty. I talked about how they can lure you into the woods or desert, and how my grandmother's first herd of cattle were ripped apart and thrown around like chew toys. She lived in northern Utah. I talked about the screams and how they are blood-curdling and like nothing you have heard before. I detailed about how they can shapeshift from one animal to another, and how that animal will sometimes stand up on 2 paws and walk like a human. I also detailed how they are evil, and I made sure to put emphasis on it. All of what I was talking about had my friends in a trance. We were sat around the fire, in a circle, drinking beer, and when I spoke my stories they all stopped drinking and focused on what I was saying. It was awesome for me because I'm usually the back burner friend. No one really asks what goes on with my life except horny guys on Tinder looking for a lay, or my parents. The night went on and one by one my friends went home. Don't worry, I made sure they were sober and had a bite to eat before giving their keys back. Slowly it became only me and one of my close friends. She leaned in to ask me if everything I said was true, and I did tell her I believed in it. But it's an old tale from my grandmother and Navajo tribes. After another hour of us shitting the bull, she left, and Maxine and I went to bed. Everything was normal after that for about 3 days. Then the weird shit started happening. On the morning of the third day after the bonfire, I was taking Max for our normal morning walk when we started approaching the end of the property line. Max started snarling and the hair on her back raised, and she started barking at the tree line. It set me off guard, and I tried giving the signal to the Max because I thought it was some drugged up person walking in the forest. I couldn't get Maxine's attention. I called her by her nickname, then her full name, but nothing was working. She stood her ground barking and snarling at the tree line. That's when I heard a twig snap in the woodline and Max ran as fast as she could back to our little camper. Like the sane person I am, I didn't investigate. I ran like hell. I didn't want to die. Ironic, right? Once we both got inside, Max seems restless and paced the camper until I made her lay down and rest a bit. Maybe she was having an off day. After her nap, she seemed back to normal and nothing else seemed to happen during the day. I had forgotten about the stories I told around the fire 3 days beforehand, so I wrote it off as maybe a bear or wild cat. And it made sense because she hasn't seen one before, but it was still weird of her to act how she did. As the day grew older and the sun was ready to set, I let Max out to go and do her business before I started getting ready to settle into my comfy bed and read. Max came back and played down on her couch and we got settled. I must have fallen asleep reading because I woke up to my book laying on my chest and a blood-curdling scream. Max was up on her couch on all fours staring dead at the door to the camper, growling and snarling. I quickly got up and locked the camper door. I guess I forgot to before I fell asleep, and lifted up my bed to grab a .22 pistol I kept underneath just in case. I called Max to sleep on the bed with me. I'm not going to lie, I was scared. No, not scared. Petrified. Max was alert next to me as the screams went on through the night. The screams finally stopped around 4 in the morning and I fell asleep clutching the gun. Yes, the safety was on, and there wasn't anything in the chamber, in my right hand and my left hand on Max. I slept until the late morning. I woke up around 11. With Max seemed to have fallen asleep half laying on me facing the front of the camper. I woke to Max up to take her to go to the bathroom and to walk around and play a little, and it was like she was back to normal completely. But today we didn't go back to the property line, we stayed closer to the camper, and worked and played and listened to nature's music. The day went by normal. At night it was back with the screaming. This went on for a couple of weeks and I and Max got used to it, still wary but used to the screams, until one night came along where things got even more terrifying. It was about 2.5 weeks after the blood-curdling screams started. When they started, the screams weren't close by us. They were by the property line in the back. You know, by the dense woods. Well, they seemed to be getting closer this night, probably more towards the middle of the back property, and there were 2 creatures letting out these horrific screams. By this point, I still haven't remembered the Skinwalker stories I told the night of the bonfire. Either way, I was still terrified. But again, I got used to the screams, and fell asleep, with Max by my side. When I and Max got up the next morning, it was around 9 in the morning, we went outside, and it looked as if a tornado went through. My picnic table was flipped over, the fire pit had been thrown 50 feet to the right, and dead animals ripped and tore to pieces were left absolutely everywhere. And that's when it hit me, you aren't supposed to speak of skinwalkers, or it could attract them. But I was in East Tennessee, not Utah or the surrounding states. So how could it be a skinwalker? I and Max took the 20 minutes to walk to my nearest neighbor, who I rarely talk to. I had Max on a leash, and as we were coming up onto the small cabin the lady lived in, I noticed dead animals all over her yard too. I knocked on the door and she warily opened it with a gun in hand. Now, this lady isn't violent or mean in any way. She is actually rather nice. As she opened the door, she saw it was me through the screen door also in place and set her gun down. "Hey, Max and I just came over to see how you were doing." "Oh hey Sarah, I'm doing okay." She had trailed off. "So, weird shit has been happening on my property and I was just wondering if you have heard screams or anything else at night. I noticed that you have wild animal carcasses littered all over your yard." "Yeah? In fact, my dogs went missing a couple of days ago." She was cut off by something slamming down next to the house. Her house had trees surrounding her house and littered across her property mildly like mine until you hit the property line. Her property was about 2 acres wider than mine on each side, but the densely wooded forest started where mine had started. She grabbed the gun from arm's length of her and ran past me to the side of the house. I followed her and Max went in front of me with her hair up but not barking or snarling. When I reached my neighbor, she was crouched down and sobbing. Max and I walked closer and it came into view that 2 dogs have hit the ground from above. I won't go into detail about them, but it was gruesome. Something had dropped them from the trees. Which is weird because skinwalkers don't normally come out during the day, or so I thought. My neighbor quickly stopped crying and ushered us to her truck. She clearly didn't want my company anymore, but I don't blame her. She was going to drive us back home. It took maybe 3 minutes to get from her place to mine. She dropped Max and I off. I thanked her, shut the door, and my neighbor quickly sped off. It was safe to say to me and Max spent the rest of the day inside with the door deadbolted. I heard weird sounds from outside, but I didn't dare to investigate. That night, for the first time in a while, was quiet, and for a brief moment, I thought I was safe, that life could go back to normal. The next 2 nights lead me to where I'm at now, telling this story, in hopes that someone can tell me what to do. On the first night after the normal night, shit went haywire. I and Max had fallen asleep around 9 p.m. after a fairly normal day of cleaning my property and getting it back to normal. We were awoken by a god-awful scream and twice as bad stench that seemed to be right outside my camper. I knew I had the door deadbolted shut, so I wasn't worried until my camper started shaking like someone was trying to tip it over. This went on for what seemed like forever until I heard 2 gunshots from the left. Whatever this thing was got hit and screamed a scream I have never in my life heard before. That's when the laughing started. Whatever this thing was, started laughing. Like I said before, I don't know much about skinwalkers, so I didn't know they could laugh. The laughing started to go further away in the direction of where the gun went off, and then the rest of the night was quiet. Too quiet. The silence was so deafening, it freaked me out even more. The night crept on and still, I didn't hear anything. I started drifting off into sleep when I started to hear banging on my camper door. The banging shook the entire camper. Then I heard screaming, "Help me, please let me in, they're coming. Please Sarah, hurry, let me in." The voice seemed to be my neighbor but off. I couldn't explain it. On one hand, it sounded like her, but on the other, it had a slightly off dialect as hers. She had a deep twang to her voice since she grew up in East Tennessee her whole life, but this voice almost like it was trying to mimic her voice. The stench came wafting in through the AC vents just in time. Right as I was about to unlock and open the door, I stood frozen in my tracks. The voice then warped to be my father's voice, pleading for help, but I knew I couldn't open the door, or it would mean certain death. Then came the other voice, my mother, from the second creature. But again, like my neighbor, the dialect was slightly off, but they were crying for help. Underneath my full-size bed was a huge storage compartment. It was accessible by a sliding door by the base of the bed. I had it built from metal, to fit in the camper, also to use it as a bed frame. But I only kept one gun, my pistol, underneath, in case I needed to hide in there for some reason. Well, this was just that reason. I slid open the door and climbed inside and called Max to come in with me. Then I shut the door. Everything became muffled at that point. The voices switched between my siblings to my parents, to my neighbor, but since I wasn't willing to come out, this seemed to piss these creatures off even more. I hid under the bed and shook until morning when I heard police knock. I was wary to come out from my metal shelter, but I didn't open the door. "Hello, is this Sarah's house?" one police officer initiated. "Hello, yes, I'm Sarah. Is something wrong? We just wanted to ask some questions about your neighbor, bleep for her protection. Did you witness any grizzly bear or wild cats on your property lately? Maybe even a person?" "Well, not a bear or wild cat, but some weird stuff has been going on around here lately." And I told the officers about everything that had happened in the past month. Up until that point, of course, I knew nothing was going to come of it because the police force doesn't go looking into mythical creatures. But they did take my statement and left. But before they did, I told them if they needed to get in contact with me, to go to my parents' address. That's when they told me it was a good idea to leave because my neighbor had been brutally murdered and ripped apart by something or someone. It was her who shot at the creatures. At that point, I was done. I was ready to pack up and leave. So I started to pack everything up, and I called my parents to let them know I was moving on to their property. My dad asked if I needed help and I obliged, and he said he would be there within the hour to help me load up my camper onto my truck, which I have only done a handful of times. Then I called my place of employment and apologized for the late reports and let them know I would get back to work tomorrow, that I was having some trouble with getting them uploaded. I was only halfway through packing my shit when my dad arrived. He didn't ask any questions but did, in fact, help me pack and secure the inside of my camper down so when traveling my stuff wouldn't fly all over the place. He noticed that all of my outdoor items have been completely trashed and pushed them to the side and out of the way, which I thanked him for since there was no way in hell I was taking them with me, especially after what I heard from the police. We finally finished packing and hooking up my fifth-wheel camper to my truck in the late afternoon, around 5 p.m. I loaded up Max, and my dad leads the way. I finally felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I finally felt like I was safe. Maybe whatever is there will stay there. My dad didn't ask me what was wrong, he just knew. And like any good father, he helped me get packed and ready to move back home. Even though I was still going to live in my fifth wheel with Max, I felt safe. As I was driving, I felt happy again. Not so terrified of whatever was going on behind me. I was singing and dancing and giving Max all the love and appraisal she deserved for helping me get through it all. As all this happiness appeared, I quickly went. I looked over into the woods and two creatures were running alongside my truck in the wood line. The way back to my parents' house was through back roads in the county, which means they were long, curvy, heavily wooded, and more than one creek winding through them. Most of the creeks didn't have guardrails since the roads weren't used as much as they would be in a city or town. The roads were easy to navigate in the day, but since the sun was setting quickly, I knew we had to get to the house as quickly as possible. I tried everything to distract myself from the creatures running beside my truck. I looked over at Max and she was sound asleep, not even noticing them. Somehow, I couldn't keep my eyes off of them. I tried as hard as I could to focus on the road and my surroundings. I tried to focus on how pretty the leaves looked during the fall. I thought of my family and friends. I thought of all my wonderful coworkers who did on occasion call or send me flowers for being good at my job. I looked at all the streams and creeks I was passing and admiring how beautiful they looked. I listened to the radio playing all my favorite oldies and sang along to them. Still, my eyes drifted. They weren't slowing down. They didn't seem tired. These creatures were still weaving in and out of the tree line, staring me down. I couldn't quite look at them long enough to figure out what they were, but they were some sort of dog-like creature. Yet, as I was driving, they seemed to be quiet. They didn't scream or do weird noises like I heard the night before. They almost seemed to be waiting for something. The sun was setting even faster. It was slowly getting darker and darker. Luckily, I had amazing headlights to light up the road in front of my pretty well. But still, the part of the county we were in had a 2-lane road that was small. Only one yellow line distinguished which side of the road you were on. Since I had a heavy-duty truck, I had to ride in the middle so I wouldn't send my truck nor my camper into the ditch. I continued to drive behind my dad, occasionally looking to see how far ahead he was. He didn't travel faster than the speed limit, but this time he was 30 yards ahead of me. I sped up to keep close behind. I was slowly catching up when we passed over one of the deeper creeks. Bam! Splash! Something had hit the side of my truck hard enough to flip it off the road. I must have been unconscious for hours. When I came to, I woke up with someone flashing a light in my eyes. I could see their mouths moving, but all I could hear was a deep ringing. Everything seemed fuzzy and I drifted between conscious and unconsciousness. The last thing I remember was getting loaded onto the ambulance and seeing my truck and camper in literary pieces. I couldn't see the Max at first, but when I did, I noticed she was 10 feet up into a tree and shredded to pieces. I don't remember much, but I do remember, I had been transported to a hospital near a decent-sized city, and I had been in a coma for only a couple days when I finally woke up. I woke up in the middle of the night when a nurse came to check on me. When she opened the door and saw I was awake, she ran out in a panic. It must have been a good 10 minutes when she and a man came walking in. "Hey, you're going to be fine. I see you have woken up. Do you know where you are?" the man said. I couldn't talk. I had a fucking piece of plastic shoved down my throat. When I noticed it, I started gagging and coughing. The nurse quickly grabbed something and shoved it into my fore, and I was out like a light again. From what my parents told me, I had to be put into a coma for 3 weeks to let my body heal from the accident. I eventually woke up, healed and ready to get up and go. But alas, I still had to stay for a week to let my body adjust. I don't really know. Eventually, I did get to go home to my parents. I had no truck, I had no camp trailer, and I had no Max. I still remember the shape her body was in, and I don't think anyone but me noticed. I spent most of my first day home mourning the loss of Max. I missed her so much. She didn't deserve this. I felt like all of this was my fault, and essentially it was. That night the noises started back up, the screams, the different voices, everything. I was pissed. What could they possibly want? They killed my dog, ruined my truck and camper, and put me in a coma for weeks on end. I got up and wobbled outside. "Shut up. Go away," I screamed everything I possibly could to get them to go away. I walked out further into my parents' yard to confront these senile creatures. That's when I noticed. They didn't look like dogs or coyotes or wolves. They kind of did, but not fully. The back end of them was the body of a dog, but the front was humanism, and the head of the creature was big, fluffy and misshapen. There were at least 20 of these creatures. I quickly turned on my heel and went back inside. I could tell they were running right for me, but I couldn't run. I was still hurt. I accepted the fact that I could possibly get killed, and I was fine with it. I wasn't with anyone, and my parents have multiple children. I reached the door, quickly ran in, shut it and locked it all in time. I could hear the creatures throw their bodies against the house, and it felt like a never-ending earthquake shook the house to its core. I could feel them breathe. My parents came running down the stairs and grabbed me, rushing me down to the basement as the back door splintered into pieces, letting more and more of the evil creatures in. My dad deadbolt didn't hit a little red button in the basement. The sound of screeching metal filled my ears as a metal box surrounded the room. "Why haven't you ever told me of this?" I asked. "I built it just in case," my dad replied, and with that reply, he went cold. That's when I knew, this has happened before to Grandma, and as far as I know to me. I turned to my mother and I asked her what happened. She looked at me and sighed. She knew exactly what I meant when I asked her question, which sent her into a story I have never even imagined. Back in the day, when Grandma was a young teenager, her parents lived here in Tennessee. She dated a young Shawnee boy. She loved this boy to pieces. They spent every waking moment attached at the hip. Well, her daddy didn't like him too much. He thought it was unethical, fucking racist bastard, and decided to, well, take care of the problem. Since then the Shawnee tribe has cursed any land our family was touched. That's why she died when you were young. Different creatures of the day or night stalk us, waiting for the moment to kill us. And you called upon one of the night creatures, and now they're here. I could hear furniture being ripped to pieces, and the house torn apart. My heart pounded out of my chest. I was angry. I was depressed knowing what my mum was going to say next. "They are here because you called them upon us again. We lived in the shadows, until now." She stopped and turned away. I could tell that she was angry and frustrated. I felt my heart sink to my stomach. I did this. This was all my fault. It had felt like we have been in this metal imprisonment for weeks. We had enough food, and only one single flashlight. We had buckets with lids for hours. You know the business. We slept on the floor in sleeping bags, and for pillows, we used our jackets. It was coyish, a little too cozy. My parents didn't really talk to me, nor I to them. I was subsequently the one who brought this upon us, with the help of my grandmother, of course. Throughout this entirety, we still heard the creatures scream. They had stopped ripping apart our house after a few hours. Unfortunately, they did surround the metal box. Or that's what it seemed like. They were waiting for us to come out of hiding. They would quiet down for a couple of hours. Then they would scream and try to lure us out of our metal bunker, using the voices of people in our lives. One by one, they cycled through people, from my mother's patients to friends and family members, until all we heard was what seemed like a crowd of people screaming and bawling their eyes out. They did this every single time. Every single time. It was wearing my mom out. At one point I and dad had to physically sit on her to get her from pushing the button. Hell, let's be honest, it was wearing us out. They knew how to trigger our emotions. Only a handful of times did I hear Max's disembodied yelp and screams. It infuriated me. My poor baby didn't deserve this bullshit. Every time I heard that yelp I wanted to push the button and run out to save her, but right before I did, I remembered each time that she was gone. I was going insane. I felt like shit for putting Max into the situation that leads her to her demise. I felt like I had put my family in a death or death situation. My parents wouldn't talk to me if at all, and I was defeated. What I believed to be a day. Everything was going about as our new normal when I started hearing whimpering. A couple of the creatures started to whimper for a while. Then struck absolute chaos. Sirens and gunshots and what sounded like chanting rang through the metal bunker. It was a bittersweet feeling to hear something other than creatures trying to kill us. At one end, was it just our minds playing tricks on us? or was it real? My parents heard it too. They actually started talking to me and to each other. Then we made up a game plan. When the gunshots and sirens stop and we hear voices, we will hit the button and take the risk of going back into the house. If we die, whatever. If we live, awesome, let's move on with our lives. And we took our places around the bunker and waited. It seemed like hours had passed before the gunshots and sirens stopped ringing. That's when we heard two voices calling out our names. Hesitantly my dad hit the button and slowly the mental prison we had been confined to lifted. I could hear the slabs of metal slamming back to their dormant position and light filling up the room like a pleasant ocean. I was the first to walk up and out of the bunker. I walked up the stairs. That's when I saw her. I remembered at that moment, if, for any reason, that someone couldn't contact me or my parents, they were to call my closest friend Sierra. She was my 3 and final emergency contact on all my forms. Next to her was the cop on the scene at my accident. I walked up with my hands in the air so I wouldn't get shot and killed by the policeman, and my parents followed behind closely. I hugged Sierra before I could notice my parents' house. It was in absolute shambles. A whole wall had been torn off and ripped to pieces. All of the furniture had been turned literally inside out. Holes in the wall, the whole 9 yards. People who I didn't recognize walked around the house chanting something and the police officer started to speak. I don't remember much of the conversation, but I do remember that the hospital called Sierra to notify her that I hadn't made it to one of my appointments and couldn't get a hold of me. She had informed them that she hadn't been able to get a hold of me either. And then she contacted the authorities. She had driven past my parents' property before the authorities had arrived and smelt a stench that was all too recognizable and called a friend who was a part of the Shawnee tribe. Then had called the authorities to tell them to meet her somewhere close by to explain the situation she had just seen and to give her and them time for the Shawnee tribe to arrive. That's when they saved us. The officer looked at my parents and started to explain that unfortunately with situations like these, we had to go into a protection plan, kind of like the witness protection plan but different. The indigenous groups of America came up with a protection plan for people who had things like this happen, which meant me and my parents and Sierra had to uproot our lives and move somewhere completely different, change our names and social security numbers, and become completely different people. I looked towards my parents and they looked so undeniably defeated but eventually agreed. The officer turned to me and Sierra and asked if I wanted to do the same or risk having my life be taken. I and Sierra agreed. Before I could be whisked into a new life, I asked to go outside and get a breath of fresh air. The officer agreed and I walked out the back door. This time there weren't any weird creatures smiling back at me viciously. I sat down on the grass in my backyard and looked up to the sky and thanked Max for everything she did for me. I thanked my neighbor and her dogs, and all the animals who died in this process, and I apologized to all of them. Then I sat in pure silence, embracing every twitter from the birds, every day of sunlight that grazed my skin, and breathed. From not far, but distant enough, I heard a tiny whimper. I got up, and despite my mind telling me how stupid can you fucking be, you almost died just now, stop walking towards it. I let my body walk towards the bush that it was coming from. I reached underneath to see what it was and to pull it out when I felt something fluffy. Not really surprised, I pulled out the fluffy little creatures from under the bush and I looked at it and smiled. A small dark fox with markings around its ears and eyes like Max's looked up at me. It was malnourished and needed somewhere warm to be, so I took it and walked inside. The cop looked at me and the foxling and ushered us to his vehicle without question. Here I am, on this car ride to the station. All I can hope for is peace and protection. I am going to look after and raise this foxling as best I can until it's time to be released into the wild. Wish me luck. Hello, friends. How do trees access the internet? They log on. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. My husband and I always wanted our son to be adventurous. We wanted to watch him grow up asking questions about everything, seeking out answers, and looking for adventure. It seems like whenever parents have a deep desire for how they want their children to be, their children instinctively know and go the complete opposite direction. As Sam grew up, he became very introverted and would actively ask when it was time for bed. He loved to sleep, and our doctor gave a lot of explanations. All the illnesses had been checked and crossed out before he said, "I think he just likes to get away from reality. He likes his dreams more than he enjoys life." This was at the age of 8. This actually depressed us as parents. What could be so wrong, so uninteresting about his life that he would come home and just sleep? The doctor recommended that we plan family activities that were geared towards him as a way to engage him in life. Give him something to be excited about after school. So, for our very first trip, we decided we would go on a hike. The mountains were about an hour away, and we considered this a mild introduction to our new family habit. When we told Sam where we were going, he was ecstatic. We knew then that hiking had been the right activity. On Saturday, we threw together some backpacks, lunch, water, and even a magnifying glass so Sam could inspect everything closely. He was so excited the entire way there. We were all thrilled. When we parked at the trailhead, Sam leapt out of the car and almost ran up the trail without us. I had to call him back so we could keep an eye on him. The hike was short, maybe half a mile, but Sam tried to run it like a marathon. We kept calling for him to come back and check out this bird, or this butterfly, or the log that looked like a grandpa's face. He would come and look to humor us, but then run ahead. Eventually, we gave up trying to point things out and let him just run through the woods. We were pleased that he had taken so well to the trip. For once, Charlie and I felt like we knew what we were doing as parents. Anyone who's a parent knows how that feels. We got to the end of the trail and ate our lunch. We were at a ledge along the mountain that was more like a hill. The sun was high overhead and we could see over the trees for miles. Sam quickly downed his lunch and we let him run off into the trees. "Not too far," I warned him. He obeyed, and we could always see him. From the rock where we sat, I watched Sam while Charlie went to the bathroom. I watched Sam pick up sticks, swing them at bushes and tree trunks until the stick broke, then pick up another one. He picked one up that was too short to be swung, but he smiled wide at it and ran around with it in front of him, using both hands. Finally, he ran over to me and said, "Mom, feel this stick. It feels so cool." "Oh yeah?" I grinned, taking the stick from him. It was in the shape of a Y, and when I grabbed one of the sides of the Y, it was perfectly smooth. It looked like someone had taken a knife and whittled a bigger branch down into this smooth, slingshot-shaped stick. The two sides of the Y were curved, almost like bicycle handlebars. "That's very smooth," I said to encourage him. He looked at me funny, then ran back into the woods to keep playing. We packed up lunch, stuffed everything back in the backpacks, and announced that we were ready to hike back. Sam came back without a fuss, and we began walking down the trail. Instead of running ahead, Sam lagged behind, still clutching the Y stick. He held it in front of him with both hands as before and was swinging it around slowly as if it were a magnifying glass and he was searching for something. "Come on, Sam," Charlie encouraged gently when he stood in one place for too long. We both had to stop because he had fallen so far behind. He was pointing his stick into the trees, arms outstretched. He kept looking from the stick to the trees as if trying to line something up. We both waited patiently for a few seconds, but the heat was getting to us and we were ready for an air-conditioned car. "Sam, honey, let's go," I called. "Okay," he called back but didn't move. Charlie sighed and walked back to him. He put his hands on both of Sam's shoulders and guided him down the trail. The whole time, Sam kept both hands firmly on the stick and tried his best to point it back towards the trees where he'd been looking. He didn't point it towards where he had been standing, I noticed later, but at a spot past the trail and into the trees. Always at one position. Charlie finally got him to where I was, and we kept walking. Sam eventually stopped pointing his stick, and instead kept it down in front of him, both hands still being used to hold either side of the Y. We drove home, pleased that Sam was taking home a souvenir. Our day trip had worked. He was getting involved with life. We were one step closer to our adventurous son. Over the next couple of days, lots of things started happening. They all seemed disjointed and not connected at the moment. Later, the memory would connect them to me. Sam went back to his sleeping routine. He would come home from school, go into his room, and play for a bit by himself while dinner was being made. I got him to work on homework, then served dinner when Charlie got home. After that, he went straight to bed by his own choice. This wasn't abnormal for him, so I wasn't any more concerned than usual. A few nights after we got home, I noticed that Sam's bedroom light was on even though he'd gone to bed hours ago. His door was closed, so I went to go and turn off his light for him. I figured he might have left it on when he fell asleep or something. The second I opened the door, Sam leapt off the floor and jumped into bed, like he knew he was in trouble. It was only 7 in the evening, I wasn't about to yell at him for not going to bed when he said he was. His rapid jump into bed had me worried though. "Sam? What's up?" "Nothing," he said in that kiddish tone that screams I didn't do anything. I looked around the room and saw what I always saw, his toys were out and lined up in some game he must have been playing. Nothing was out of place or irregular. "You jumped up as soon as I came in, anything wrong?" "No." "Okay," I said slowly, unsure of what else to say. He looked at me with untold terror in his eyes. "Are you sure nothing is wrong?" I pressed. "I can hang out with you for a bit if you want." He stared right through me, his eyes wide. It took him a few seconds to reply. "No, Mother, I'm going to bed now. Can you turn out the light?" I blinked. He's never called me mother in his life. I should have pushed myself in and sat on his bed and talked until he admitted what was wrong. But I didn't. Charlie called my name, and it distracted me. I wished him a good night, turned off the light, and shut the door. Talking later on with Charlie about it, Charlie thought that maybe he had somehow discovered masturbation, even at his young age. When you run around on the floor the right way, it just happens, Charlie told me. Apparently, that was how he had discovered it. So, I chalked the situation up to that. Sam also kept carrying that Y stick around everywhere. He always kept it within reach. During dinner, he kept it on the table. When I told him that sticks don't belong on the dining room table, he kept it on his chair next to him. He took it to bed and kept it next to his head. He even took it to school. I tried fighting him on it once, but he claimed he was taking it to show and tell. I was about to insist that he leave it home, but he looked like he might cry if I came down the firm. So, I let him on the condition that if his teacher mentioned it to me that I'd make him leave it home. He agreed. One day, Charlie was taking out the garbage and the bag caught on the door jamb. The contents of the bag spilled all over the floor, and he quietly cursed and went to get another bag. That was when he found about 20 of Sam's toys in the trash. They varied from stuffed animals to action figures. Confused, Charlie asked me if I had thrown them away, or was punishing Sam for something. I told him no, and was equally puzzled. Sam, for some unknown reason, had been throwing his own toys away. Together, after dinner, we sat down with Sam at the table to ask about the toys. We saw it as a cry for help. They were selected, he said in response. They weren't doing a good enough job, so they were fired. Their time was up. Charlie told Sam that we don't throw toys away because they cost money and we don't waste things. Sam nodded, but I saw his hands clutch the sides of the Y-stick tightly under the table. He was stressing. Something was going on. We ended the conversation on a light note, and Sam understood why we were upset. He promised not to throw away any more toys, then ran off to bed. I just remember thinking how strange the sentence was, their time was up. That was an adult's line, not something you hear from kids. Sam's school sent an email to all the parents, about 2 weeks after our hiking trip. The principal pleaded with parents to not let their children come to school if their child was sick, as there was a very serious flu going around the school. He even admitted that 5 teachers and 30 students had been sick over the last week alone. I showed it to Charlie, but he didn't find it as weird as I did. Hand sanitizer breeds superbugs, he shrugged. Just tell Sam to wash his hands more often. The final straw for me came a few nights later. It was a Wednesday night when I woke up for no reason. Charlie was snoring next to me, but in a lull between snores, I heard a whisper. Fear seized my throat, and I lifted my head off the pillow slowly to peer at the bedroom door. Someone moved in the dark, stumbling along. Someone small and short. Sam. Irritated, I got up and walked to the door. I saw Sam skip away as if he were crossing a field of spiders and was desperate not to get any on his shoes. Sam, I whispered, walking out after him. I turned the corner into the family room, but he wasn't there. I heard bare feet race across the kitchen floor, and that made me angry. The little shit was hiding from me. I walked through the family room and noticed that the clock on the wall was way louder than usual. Or maybe I was hypersensitive because I was exhausted. When I entered the kitchen, Sam was facing me. He stood next to the fridge, and the small LEDs on it lit up his expression. He was terrified, and his little Y-stick was pointed right at me. Sam, I hissed in annoyance. It's late. Go back to bed. I need water, he said, still looking at me with wide eyes. It was an obvious lie, but one not abnormal for kids caught up past their bedtime. Okay, then get some water, I sighed. Can you get it? He asked, still clutching the stick and pointing it my way. He must have seen my mum look because he re-emphasized. Please. I walked forward, and that's when I noticed that he pointed the stick around me. He was pointing at something behind me. I whirled around really fast and stared into the empty darkness of the family room. The clock was still noticeably loud. It sounded like a person saying the actual words. Tick-tock. Tick-tock. I looked around the room for a full 30 seconds. Nothing moved. What are you doing up, Sam? I asked, turning back to face him. He looked at me with real, true terror in his eyes. The stick was shaking in his hand. "Sam," I hissed, snapping a little bit. "It's not time yet," he stuttered, barely glancing at me. His gaze was transfixed beyond me. "I'm not ready yet." For half a second, I wondered if he was pretending to sleepwalk. Then I wondered if he actually was sleepwalking. Then my tiredness washed over me and I got irritable again. "It's time for bed," I insisted, walking towards him. Still, he kept his eyes behind me, and the stick pointed into the family room. Okay, he said, defeated as I approached. He took slow, unwilling steps towards the family room. I stood behind him, watching to make sure he went to bed. I saw his head look back and forth, scanning the room as he entered. He was looking for something. He looked back at me with uncertainty. Suddenly, he screamed. "Mom! Watch out!" I instinctively whirled around, hands up and ready to attack whatever was there. Nothing. Nothing but darkness and the far kitchen wall. I ground my teeth and glared down at him. He was still shaking, pointing his stick into the empty kitchen. I was beyond annoyed now. This stick had been out of control for weeks. "I think you need a break from this," I said, snatching the stick from his hand. No, he screeched. Sam practically leapt at me, but I jumped out of the way. This was the only way, I assured myself. This stick wasn't healthy after all. Don't. He cried and yelled, following me through the family room and into the hall. All the attention that he'd pointed into the kitchen was now directed at me. He tried to jump and grab at the stick, but I held it above my head. I felt like a teenage older sibling, teasing my younger brother. But this was necessary. I regretted waking Charlie up, but I pushed my way into my room, tossed the stick onto the floor, and turned back to get Sam out. Give it to me, give it to me, give it to me," he demanded without taking a breath. I pushed him out and shut the bedroom door. I flipped the lock on the handle and sighed. "News going on?" Charlie mumbled. I took the stick away. "He was playing with it all night," I sighed, coming back to bed. Sam was pounding on the door. I convinced Charlie that we should ignore him, let him tire himself out, and tomorrow we would lecture him. He verbally agreed, though I could sense that he didn't agree inside. It took an hour, but Sam gave up, and we went to sleep. The next morning, my throat felt like I had swallowed sandpaper. The flu. Of course. My stomach rumbled and rousted me out of bed. I found myself starting to run to the master bathroom after my stomach turned nauseous. I puked up spaghetti from dinner the night before. Stumbling out of the bathroom, I had to move aside for Charlie, who couldn't make it to the toilet and threw up into the sink. "Not you too," I sighed sympathetically. "I haven't been this sick since I was a kid," he moaned, rinsing his mouth out. I rubbed my eyes, still tired from Sam's ordeal last night, and got in the shower with the lights off, hoping it would help my light sensitivity. Charlie decided to call in sick and rest for the day. I got ready for the day so I wouldn't lounge around in my pajamas all day, feeling even sicker. When I was completely ready, I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped out. Sam was nowhere in sight, which meant he had gone back to bed. Good. "Sam, I hope you're getting ready for school," I said loudly. No reply. I went to his room and found the door shut as usual. I twisted the handle and pushed, but the door was stuck. "The hell," I muttered quietly. Using my shoulder, I shoved hard against the door. I heard a clatter, then the door opened. As I entered, I saw three things right away. 1. A chair had been placed under the door handle, preventing it from opening easily. 2. The window was wide open, with the screen missing. And 3. Sam wasn't in his room. We called the police immediately after searching the house from top to bottom. If we hadn't called them, I have no idea where we would have started. Should we have driven around, looking for him? Called his friends' houses to see if they knew where he was? The police were helpful, and I spent a miserable half day sitting by the phone, puking my guts out and worrying about Sam. The police were out driving around, searching for Sam with his picture taped to their dashboards. Charlie was dead asleep when I wandered into the bedroom, debating lying down. But I couldn't sleep while Sam was missing. The sickness would let me, of course, but the guilt of falling asleep while this was going on was too much. I saw the stick, which had landed partially under the bed when I threw it last night. All this because of a stick. Maybe the doctor was wrong. Maybe he did have something wrong with him. But it was mental. Psychological. Maybe instead of a doctor, we should take him to a psychologist. In an attempt to stay awake, I decided to search the house for the 15th time. This time, I carried the stick with me. "Sam," I said, loud enough to be heard while I walked through the family room, kitchen, and to the stairs. Maybe he was hiding in the storage room downstairs. Maybe behind a few boxes. "Sam," I said again, "I have your stick. I'm sorry I took it. Please come out, Mommy is really worried. You aren't in trouble." I descended the stairs, and halfway down, I thought I heard him reply. It was faint, far away. The words were impossible to make out. "Sam," I cried desperately, spinning around on the stairs to try and figure out if he was upstairs or downstairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a leg dart around the corner at the bottom of the stairs, towards the storage room. My hunch was correct. I sped down the stairs and turned the corner. The door was closed. I tried to twist the handle, but he had locked it. "Sam, honey, open the door please," I pleaded while reaching for the key at the top of the door frame. When he didn't unlock the door, I stuck the key in and twisted. The door popped open to reveal our pitch-black storage room. The room was in the middle of the house and had no windows. It contained our water heater and the control system for the heat and AC. The room was so large, though, that Charlie had built shelves for us to keep our seasonal decorations, our camping supplies, and extra food and water. "Sam," I said more quietly, feeling uneasy. Something about the room was getting to me. "How does the clock tick, Mother?" Sam said from somewhere in the room. I froze. The word mother made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something's not right. Something's not right. "Sam, come on out now," I stuttered. Light spilled in from the doorway, but it didn't illuminate enough of the room for me to search. I slowly stepped toward the center of the room where a string hung down from a single bulb in the ceiling. With one hand, I kept a hold of the stick. With the other, I reached out to search for the string. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there somewhere. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and at that exact instant, my hand brushed against hair. Long, greasy hair at my shoulder height. Sam wasn't that tall. The hair was tangled, and long. I yelped and jumped back, startled by the door and the hair simultaneously. Sam giggled. "Do you know how the clock ticks?" It came from my left, along the wall. The hair had been to my right. What else was in here with us? I was paralyzed. I couldn't see a damn thing. My phone was upstairs, so I couldn't use that as a flashlight. The ceiling light was somewhere in front of me, and the door was somewhere behind me. Every time I started to reach out, I remembered touching the greasy hair and recoiled. "Charlie." I called upward, hoping he could hear me. Hoping he was awake. "Tick-tock, tick-tock," Sam said again. My brain instantly remembered the sound the clock had made the night before. It was the same voice. Faintly a voice, and faintly background noise at the same time. "Sam," my voice hoarsely whispered. I had to throw up again. I swallowed their bile and felt one more time for the string. It brushed my hand, and I jumped back before realizing that I was feeling string, not greasy hair. Resolutely, I launched my hand out and grabbed at the string. It swung into my hand, and I yanked on it, hard. The single bulb buzzed to life, and something moved to my right. I screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw white and black. It's taken me a long time to place the shape, but now I'm certain. A deer's skull partially covered by stringy hair darted away from the light, circling behind me. In absolute terror, I squeezed my eyes shut and didn't dare open them. In the battle for fight or flight, I turned into the ostrich, burying my head and hoping it didn't see me. I started sobbing and wanted to run for the door, but I was too scared to open my eyes. "Mommy?" Sam called from my left. I didn't respond, I was sobbing too hard. "Mommy, help, I'm stuck." Very, very slowly, I moved one finger and looked to the side. Sam was huddled up on the top shelf. I couldn't see his face, but I saw jeans and his favorite shirt. "Come down and let's go," I whispered. "I can't, it's going to get me," Sam whimpered. I tried hard not to sob again. "Come and get me, please," he begged. I fought through the terror and stepped toward the shelf, still covering my face and using a small gap in my fingers to navigate. When I reached the shelf, I closed my eyes and held my arms up. "Climb into my arms, Sam. I'll get you down and we'll go get your dad." My voice broke at the end. "I'm stuck. My shirt is caught," he cried. Okay, I said, trying to be brave for him. "Guide my hand to where it is and I'll get you loose." He paused. "It's at the back of the shelf. You can't reach." I bit my lip to stop its trembling. With both eyes still closed, I placed my hands on the top shelf and my foot on the bottom shelf. The stick was placed on the shelf so I could use both my hands. I hoisted myself up so I could reach, and balanced precariously. "Where is it, honey?" I asked, refusing to open my eyes. "Reach here," he said, and I could feel him rotate so I could reach over him. I did, and my hand ran straight into a mess of tangled, greasy hair. My eyes opened in shock. It stared back at me for only a millisecond. In that millisecond, it spoke. Not with words, but in my head. "Do you know how the clock ticks? It is fed by death." The shelf under my feet collapsed, and as I fell, my hands pulled the shelf until it toppled over, coming down on top of me. I woke up in the hospital, much to Charlie and Sam's relief. It was a tumult of information and questions. They asked why I was down there, and instead of sounding insane, I said that I'd been searching for Sam again just in case. Sam had been found walking on the road in the general direction of the hiking spot. He wasn't very far, thankfully, and was unharmed. When Charlie practically yelled, asking why the hell he had left in the middle of the night alone, Sam said he needed to find another stick to stop the monsters. The police were, of course, recommending that he talk to a psychologist. They'd overheard the conversation. Charlie didn't wake up until the police were at our door with Sam in hand. That was about an hour after the shelf had collapsed on me. Sam and Charlie had gone looking for me in the house and found me under the collapsed shelving. The police had been right there, thankfully, and I was rushed off to the hospital. Some of my ribs were broken and so was my left leg. The shelf that had collapsed on me had held our camping tent, the fake Christmas tree, and a few other half-empty boxes. I was lucky that it wasn't the food storage shelving. The door was locked when they got to it, and the key wasn't in the lock, so they had to break it down. The second Sam saw the scene, he apparently stood over me in a protective stance, looking all around. Charlie left to get the police before they left upstairs. A couple of days after I got released from the hospital, and after Charlie had recovered from the flu that knocked him off his feet, I got to talk to Sam. I asked him outright what had been going on. It took a few minutes of him denying that anything was wrong. I saw the monster, I admitted, which a parent really shouldn't do to their child. You did? He asked incredulously. I nodded. You and Dad never saw them before. When did you see them? Them? I asked nervously. Sam told me what had been happening for the last few weeks. He had stumbled upon the stick by literally tripping over it. It had spoken to him and he took it to play with it. Whenever he had the stick, he could see the monsters. They were scary, but they stayed away when I pointed the stick at them, he said. A few of them had followed us home, walking alongside us on the trail. They came into the house at night and snuck around. They came into Sam's room, our room, everywhere. They told me that someone had to die. They told me that you had to die. So, he offered the monster toy sacrifices to satiate their hunger. But, they were unsatisfied. Whenever I didn't have the stick, I could feel them try to grab me. But they stayed away whenever I had a stick. They kept telling me that your time was up. Whose time? Yours, Mommy. They sat with him at night and changed TikTok at him. They tried to convince him to put the stick down. They offered him candy that the big, blurry man pulled out of thin air. At school, they followed him and said they would hurt people until he put away the stick. 5 teachers and 30 students got the flu while they threatened that. He held onto the stick as often as he could and patrolled the house at night to keep them out of my room. That was until I took the stick. Apparently, he had grabbed the stick from a skeleton in the woods. It looked like an animal's skeleton. He had seen another one just like it when he got the first one, so he was going to go back and get the second one so the monsters would stop smiling. One had followed him on the streets, he said. But now, they were all gone. And after looking through the mess of the collapsed shelving, so was the stick. Sam told his psychologist about our conversation. His psychologist told me very angrily that I should not have admitted anything like that because it fed into his delusions. He was being looked at for possible schizophrenia. I'm thinking I should be tested too. How else do I explain everything that happened? One detail stands out that I can't explain. I had unlocked the door to the storage room and left the key in the handle. So why was the key found dangling from the light bulb string? Hello, friends. This Skinwalker is cool, but his horns need some changes. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. I have been volunteering every Friday afternoon at my local wildlife sanctuary, Pine Grove Wildlife Center, for about a year now. I started because I needed a reprieve from my unrewarding desk job, and stayed because of the great relationships I have formed with the injured birds of prey. Most of them have huge problems that prevent them from re-entering the wild. So we train them to perch to different spots on command, hop onto our gloved hands, or in the case that they can fly, we walk them by letting them soar around the forest before calling them back to our gloves. The broad-winged hawk, for instance, went from clawing at my face every time I entered her cage to happily greeting me over the course of a hard-fought year. I could tell a similar story for every bird, but you get the idea, I'm sure, and that is not what I'm here to share. I enjoyed working with the birds of prey so much that I was unfazed this past Saturday when the Wildlife Center director, I will call him Jay for privacy, called me after 6 p.m. to inform me that our Saturday volunteer, C, had never checked in to indicate that he had fed and worked with the birds. Jay said that he could not get in touch with C, and Jay himself was out of town at a conference, so I was the only person available to go check on the birds. Distressed at the thought of these animals who I have grown so attached to, spending the day bored and the night hungry, I got in my car and snaked my way up the mountain road to the Wildlife Center. On a rough half-hour drive into the deep woods, I wondered what C could be up to. It was not particularly odd to me that I had not known he was going away this week. We really only talked at the once-monthly staff and volunteer meetings, but it was confusing that he had not told Jay, seeing as he has as much interest in the birds' health as I do. When I had finished parking my car safely in the dirt employee lot and trudging up the long footpath to the birds' enclosures, we call them mews, I could tell immediately that none of the birds had eaten today. They were too alert, too excited to see me. It was already past 7:30 p.m. by this point, so I resigned myself to the fact that even if every session went along very quickly, there was no way I would be leaving before nightfall. Every session did not move along smoothly. I realized things were going to be slower at this time of day when I tried to direct my first bird, a black vulture named Maid, to perch on a scale so I could check her weight. I looked her in the eye and gave 2 firm taps on the scale with the forceps we use for feeding, tap tap, and said perch. She did not even turn around, instead opting to keep her eyes glued out the window. Every session went on in this manner, such that it was almost midnight as I walked into the mew of the last birds I had to work with tonight, the barred owls. I hung the center's electric lantern on a post inside their mew's tiny atrium as I closed the outer door. The 3 species of owl we have, barn, barred, and the screech owl, all live in subsections of a larger wooden mew, which is in essence constructed like a wooden barn. None of them can see each other, because barred owls will eat other owls in the wild. I saved this particular session for last because, as I am fond of telling the other volunteers, the barred owls are my favorite. More than any other birds we have, they seem to crave human companionship. Consequently, they can be the fastest birds to work with because they do all of the behaviors we have taught them on the first try. As I tapped on their inner door to let them know I was there, I could hear them excitedly calling out to me. A regular barred owl call, for those who have not heard it, sounds like WHO cooks for you. WHO cooks for you. Who? Of course, nothing could be so easy that day. As soon as the 2 barred owls saw my face, they changed their tune. Instead of a friendly call, they began to make territorial sounds. This call is far less pleasant. It sounds just like a child's laughter, but there is something uncanny about it. I highly suggest looking it up to hear for yourself. I should have been analytical about this development. I should have stopped to appreciate that the owls had been expecting someone other than me and that they wanted me to leave. Neither of these thoughts played in my head. Instead, I simply assumed that they had somehow memorized the schedule and they were expecting C instead of me. I took out the closest owl's favorite scale and bent down to set it on his favorite perch. Even the most well-behaved birds have a favorite everything, and deviating from it can greatly disturb them. While my head was pointed down and away from the window, I heard the faintest sound above Chef's insistent cackling. "Who cooks for you? Who? Who?" I froze. This sounded like an owl call, but it was clearly not. It was an imitation of one. The call rang out again and I knew the voice to belong to C. A wave of relief flooded over me. I would much rather be snuck upon by someone I know this late at night than by a stranger. Without thinking, I called back, "WHO cooks for you." It still had not registered to me that two things were very wrong with the situation. Number one, the lantern that I had hung up inside the mew was positioned right over the window. Someone standing in front of it would have cast a shadow, but I had stood there unperturbed in my reading of the scale as the call sounded directly above me. Number two, I was now standing fully upright, I could still hear the call, and no one was in sight. Before I had a chance to process this, another call sounded, seemingly from right outside the outer door. "WHO cooks for you. WHO cooks for you." My reaction to this call was far worse than the first one. This voice was my own, played back to me with the exact same inflection and volume as I had used only seconds earlier. I could hear both of them now, calling softly but insistently at the front door. Feeling completely powerless, I turned off the lantern and tried to peer out into the atrium. I saw the door begin to slide on its track and, I am ashamed to admit, I did not have the stomach to look at what came through it. I simply latched the inner door from the inside and sat down on the floor, trying to will my body to make no noise whatsoever. As I sat crumpled up on the floor, I heard a tap-tap on the inner door. This was done with the exact same rhythm I used to ask the birds to their perches. This was too much for me, and I resolved to remain holed up in the mew for as long as the door would hold. I must have fallen asleep that way because the floor of the owl's mew is where I woke up on Sunday morning. My phone was dead and I was exhausted, so I drove home and fell asleep for what remained of the day. That is why I didn't see the newspaper article Jay had sent me until Monday. As I got ready for work, it was a picture of two backpackers standing next to a state forest sign. I recognized it to be one about 100 miles inland of us, and the text is the reason why I hesitate to return to Pine Grove. C had been reported missing by his family a full week prior, and the hikers pictured had stumbled across his body slung high in a pine tree. The description of his state included several unpleasant details, the most disturbing of these being 6 deep puncture wounds around his back and torso. I don't know what is out there, but until I get some answers, I think I need to stay far away from Pine Grove. Hello, friends. I'm looking for a magic crystal, and the dragon wants to catch me. No, what is this? Dragonfire? The castle has disappeared. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. I am having a hard time remembering the stories told to me by my Navajo family, but when I Skype with them again I will ask for me. This creepy set of events happened directly to me though, so here goes my first personal encounters. I know, it's lengthy. But hey, Skinwalkers. They require backstory. It started when my two brothers, David and Luke, and Luke's girlfriend, Sarah, all drove down to the desert to spend some time in the country. This is Reesland as it were, so red dirt was everywhere. Southern Utah, a majestically beautiful place. If you ever get a chance, we had some pistols and decided to go out and target practice. We took our gear and some old targets to a place called Devil's Heartbeat. I had never been, but all three of them were familiar with the area. It was a canyon about 200 feet deep. We stayed on one end of the canyon, by the drop-offs, and to our left was the ravine. About 50 feet over, the opposite side of the canyon rose up above us, where some Anasazi ruins were. The Navajo may disagree with historians on the Anasazi's origins and departure. According to Navajo legend, they simply disappeared from existence, leaving behind plates, dishes, and food, and went into another dimension or some equivalent. But, whatever the history, the Navajo do not like to wander in Anasazi ruins. I never asked why, but figured it had something to do with disrespect, preserving history, etc. As such, none of the others cared a bit about these canyon ruins. They were more interested in shooting pistols. I could see old beds, ladders, and even cave drawings on the cliffs with my naked eye. And I got this strange fixation on going over there. I am not Navajo and felt that their rules didn't apply to me. I set off down the cliffs without a rope and decided I would climb down, cross the canyon floor, and then climb back up. This was a bad idea for a million reasons, but it was like some obsession. I can't explain the feeling. It was like magnetism. I wanted to be in those ruins, and it wasn't just some tourist-like curiosity. It felt like I was meant to go there. I kept slipping and getting stuck on the rocks, and I was so frustrated I almost started crying. Finally, I was deterred by the unmistakable sound of a growl coming from the canyon floor below me. There were trees down there, so I couldn't see what was making the growl, but mountain lion immediately rose to mind and I got my ass back up the cliffside. I said nothing to the others, and we shot the guns for a while. The only other strange occurrence was while Sarah was aiming, things got eerily quiet. We all heard a sound from behind us, maybe 20 feet away. It was almost a growl, then a hoarse laugh. Almost like a lion, and then a hyena. We had a clear view of the entire area and there was nothing there, certainly not on the cliff tops where we heard it anyway. The creepy part was that while David, Sarah and I all heard it from a close distance, Luke heard the exact same noise right by his ear. We ended up camping out there to see if anything would happen, and this is when I got completely terrified. Before, I was only scared of wild animals. We had guns though and were sleeping with no bags or tents, just some blankets under the stars and a little fire, so I felt safe when we all laid down. I fell asleep pretty quickly but woke up a few hours later to see everyone else laying with their eyes open wide, listening. The canyon was completely full of noises. The only way to describe it is people banging rocks together. There would be one set maybe 300 yards away, then another clacking 200 yards away, and then 50 yards away. The canyon echoes, so it was hard to tell exactly how many rock smacking rock noises there were, but they sounded like Morse code. We listened to this for maybe 10 minutes. No other animal noises, no nothing. Finally, David, who is kind of a hardest and the least superstitious of his family, shouted, "Shut up!" And everything immediately stopped. My heart was in my throat. We just sat there and stared at each other, wide-eyed. It was dead quiet, and then we heard another super weird noise from the Anasazi ruins. I don't know how to explain this one either, but it sounded kind of like a zebra noise. Like these squeaky trills. It got louder, and then the rocks/sticks/whatever started up again. But this was worse because now other animal noises came. We heard what sounded like wolves or coyotes barking, monkeys screeching. In my opinion, those were the most terrifying, owls hooting, and through it all that terrible zebra noises. We said nope and got our happy little asses out of there immediately. It took us maybe 10 minutes to douse the fire, pack our blankets, and speed away, and the noises were continuing that entire time. That night I was obviously pretty shaken up. Before I could fall asleep again, my Navajo mother came and sat by me, and said that she could tell I had a rough day. We hadn't mentioned the creepy shit, to avoid a lecture about fucking with the spirits. She asked me about it, and I ended up spilling my guts about not seeing the canyon ruins. It was something personal, it felt like. I wanted to go there. Why couldn't I go there? It would have been beautiful. After I told her all about it, I could see that she had a really concerned look on her face. What is it? I asked, totally confused, and she explained something I had no idea about. The spirits in the ruins like to lure people up. When they get up on the ground, the spirits push them off. That's why we don't go there. I remained creeped out for the remainder of the visit. The town has a public accessible kiva, kind of a tourist trap for a little podunk place, but since I didn't see the ruins up close I went down into the kiva. And I went alone. As of course, my superstitious family refused to enter other natives' dwellings. I figured that nothing could push me off a cliff if I was in a kiva. I was right, but something even worse happened. Fast forward to a few weeks later. I worked at a shitty call center in Salt Lake City, third shift. It was my first night alone and I was feeling jumpy ever since the kiva. My brothers already warned me that I had a skinwalker following me, but I, of course, didn't believe it. I don't smoke, but I followed my co-workers out for smoke breaks because I like to chat. Tonight, I lurked in the doorway because I had this horrible cloud of dread hanging over me. I was peeping out the glass door and being a total weirdo. It hit me then how paranoid I had been. That's what skinwalkers do, they mess with your mind. While I was pacing in front of the glass doors I decided that this whole thing was fucking stupid and I was going to go outside and stand there for the rest of my 10-minute break. Most of the smokers were already filing back in, but I walked out and put my hands in my pockets. Looked at the sky, looked in the building, mentally patting myself on the back for not being a pussy. Then I saw something that I will never ever be able to give a rational or even halfway accountable explanation for. We have like 6 parking lots. In one of the lots far away from me, maybe 100 feet, I could see something walking. It was a dog, obviously, but it was almost limping and walked like it was tired or hurt. Animal lover, I forgot all about skinwalkers and I started walking toward it, making the tch camera doggy noises. And then I stopped abruptly. The dog had the body form of a greyhound, and it was grey, but there was something very wrong with it. It had bloody legs and limped, but it walked more as a person would on feet and hands. Its butt was moving to and fro, if that makes any sense. When it heard me, it just stopped without turning, something I've never known any dog to do, and finally, it looked over its shoulder at me, and this is the freaky part. This dog was looking at me the way a person does. It had huge eyes, way too big for a greyhound, and its teeth were bared like it was considering biting me. Then it growled, but it was like a whistle growl. Noises no regular animal makes. It almost sounded like it wanted to talk to me or was taunting me. Somehow in the middle of all this, I realized it didn't have a tail, and I'd heard from all the Navajo stories that skinwalkers, when they appear as animals, don't have tails. Forgetting all logic and rationality, I turned and jetted. I didn't look back until I was back inside the building and had pulled the doors shut behind me, and by then when I looked, of course, the fucking thing was gone. When I described this to my brothers, they were absolutely sure it was a skinwalker, and they went through the trouble of blessing me, my apartment, them, and their apartments. I never saw the creepy bloody dog again, and I have never since even slightly wanted to visit cliff ruins.